the Premier of British Columbia, David Eby, joins me now. Premier, thank you so much for making the time for us on such a busy day.
Yeah, you bet, Catherine. Thanks for having me.
As we were discussing a few moments ago at the beginning of our conversation with Mr. Sarai, we played a clip from you where you said, listen, if you say that this agreement between BC and the federal government is a quid pro quo, like that is an injustice to this agreement. There's so much packed into what you announced with the federal government today. I take your point on that, but I do wonder, do you think there is more in this agreement because of this pipeline deal? Did you get a better agreement because of what's happening with the Alberta pipeline?
I think the reality of the agreement is probably as attributable to the Trump administration as it is to any other geopolitical event, including nationally in Canada. The Prime Minister had absolutely no obligation to engage with British Columbia on the pipeline project. The feds have clear jurisdiction. We battled it out as a province with the previous federal administration on the Trans Mountain pipeline and lost because it is clear that the federal government has responsibility. It is to the Prime Minister's credit that he heard us about our unhappiness about the level of federal time, attention, energy, and money going into major projects in almost every other province compared to British Columbia. And to his credit, he sat down with us and said, well, what are your projects? How can we work together? And that's what today's agreement is about.
You said of BC in the announcement today, we haven't been receiving our fair share, but today that is changing. I note the use of the present tense. Would you say things are fair for BC now?
This is a remarkable and unprecedented agreement for our province. I know it's the kind of thing, I'll be blunt, it feels like Eastern provinces take for granted in terms of the level of support that they see from our federal government. It's a really big deal in BC. We don't get a $50 or $60 billion high-speed train between Ontario and Quebec. That is stuff that is just not the reality in British Columbia. So to see a Prime Minister say, no, I'm going to change that, I understand what British Columbia represents to the future of the country, the opportunities that Canada has, that these major projects are located in British Columbia, and I'm going to sit down with you and find a path forward. That's very meaningful to me personally, and I hope it resonates with British Columbians. The scale of this agreement, almost $20 billion in various commitments, pretty crucial, I think, in terms of our understanding of our place in Canada and recognition of the work that British Columbians have done quietly for generations, building big things for this country.
I am going to ask you a bit more about the pipeline and what it means for BC specifically. I want to talk about money. You said that BC needs to be fairly compensated here. Can you give us a ballpark sense of what that looks like? Are you looking for like a percentage of something in particular, or where do you see that conversation going?
Well, the challenge with the bitumen pipeline proposals that have come from Alberta is that the upside for these projects is always located in Alberta, and then all of the risk, all of the challenge, all of the problems are downloaded to British Columbia, and that has always been the tension between British Columbia and Alberta on these specific proposals. And so for our part, if this pipeline proposal manifests in an actual pipeline, and all the questions we had before are still present in terms of Alberta's proposal.
Well, there's a route now,
actually shows up,
right? I mean, that was one of your questions, is no route. You were very vocal about that. Sure sounds like there's a route.
Is there a route? Okay, I haven't seen it. I hope that Premier Smith has been working on it. We've committed, in terms of our constitutional obligations, to participate in the permitting process in good faith, once we see the route. But regardless, if there's a proponent, if someone is going to pay for it, and this pipeline gets built, British Columbians need to see a couple of things, and it's set out in the agreement. One is that the tanker ban stays in place. One is that First Nations are able to participate in a meaningful way to preserve those relationships that we depend on in this province. The third is that there's an adequate spill response so that when a spill happens, that we're minimizing the damage that comes from that to British Columbians. And finally, that we get to participate in the upside. And so making sure that two things are happening, one on any new pipeline, that we're fairly compensated, and that is work that we're committing to do with a fixed timeline over the next 6 months with the federal government, but also on the existing pipeline to reopen the compensation for British Columbia, given the upgrades that are going to be happening to that pipeline, that we see support for British Columbians taking on the significant risk.
Help me understand how to think about where you now stand in this conversation. I mean, I don't hear David Eby pipeline cheerleader today. Is this grudging support?
That's
Is
fair.
it characterize for us how you feel about how you fit into where this is going? It's grudging support?
No, this is, don't expect me or members of my government caucus to say that we like this project. We don't. This is a significant risk for us. It is a heavy bitumen pipeline project that we were not at the table negotiating and that we are still on the outside looking in. But the reality is, and here's where our support is, that we understand our constitutional obligation, our place in Canada, the fact that we do have this coast, but it's not just our coast. It's the coast of all Canadians. And the federal government has the authority here to decide that this is a project that they want to do, and we will play our part as part of Team Canada in ensuring that the permitting happens, that we are minimizing risk to British Columbians while respecting the authority of the federal government and Alberta's aspirations. That's where we're at. It doesn't mean that Premier Smith and I are going to agree about everything, or that I think this is a great project, or I'm going to be a cheerleader for it. That's what Premier Smith is for. I'm going to be a cheerleader for British Columbia's projects, for BC, and deliver deals like we did today. That's why I was in China on a trade mission. That's the work that we're going to continue to do, focusing on BC projects while respecting and understanding our place in this amazing country we call home.
The fact that there isn't a northern route, it sounds like, because the BC tanker ban remains in place. Who gets credit for making that happen? Is that about the Coastal First Nations? Is that about the work your government did? Who made that a reality?
I think that when I reflect on why the coastal tanker ban, the North Coast tanker ban is still in place, it's really actually the foundation that's been set over generations, both informally in terms of the tanker ban and then formally in terms of legislation. Conservative governments, liberal governments, First Nations governments, local communities, a $2 billion economy built on tourism, fisheries, and clean water, and the fact that there are enormous private sector projects that depend on the social license enabled by the tanker ban. For example, large-scale LNG projects, the largest private sector investments in Canadian history. When you put all of those elements together, it's no one person, but I will take a moment to give credit to the Prime Minister. He had no obligation to sit down with British Columbia. He had no obligation to commit to protecting the tanker ban. He understood the importance to me, to our government, to British Columbians of protecting the North Coast and made that commitment, and I am very grateful for that. I think it is true leadership, and it respects the nature of British Columbia and trying to find that balance and that path forward that we're always seeking between the environment, the economy, jobs, and opportunity for British Columbians and Canadians.
Billions of dollars dedicated towards the port expansion, the tanker ban staying in place, the Alberta government making an announcement just hours from now. Do you still think this is fictional, David Eby, that it's not going to happen?
I don't know. I don't know the route. I don't know the conversations Alberta has been having with proponents. But I do know that the federal government is very committed to this project. It's very clear to me that they are committed, that the Prime Minister himself is very committed to this. I know that the Premier of Alberta is very committed to this. And if it can happen, it will happen. And in that case, I need to make sure that British Columbians aren't just protected, but that we're able to see some benefit from this project as well. And that's what you see in this agreement.
Okay. Premier David Eby, you had a lot on your plate today, and you made time for Power and Politics. We appreciate that very much. Thank you, sir. Have a good day. Now, we want to talk about it with the Power panel. Peter MacKay is a former Conservative Cabinet Minister. Andrew Thomson is a former NDP Cabinet Minister in Saskatchewan. Shachi Kurl is president of the Angus Reid Institute. And Stevie O'Brien, here with me in studio, is a former Chief of Staff to Liberal Cabinet Ministers. Stevie, I will start with you. We've already got, as we were talking about with Anis Hadari and Katie DeRosa, we've got a bit of a sense of where things are going. Is this pipeline all systems go now? If BC is no longer opposing it, Alberta is certainly on side, and the federal government sounds pretty enthusiastic.
So as a partisan, as a Liberal partisan particularly, I'm having a little bit of, it's hard to keep up with this new, very pragmatic Prime Minister who isn't really taking a very partisan approach, I think, to the pipeline, to the energy policy. He is doing what he said he was going to do during the election. He's taking steps to build. Build Canada strong. He's focusing on creating an energy, turning Canada into that energy superpower. But he does seem to be dodging some of those partisan traps and taking a really pragmatic approach and not getting caught up in some of the local politics, and he seems to be succeeding. So this is not what we would have expected out of a Liberal Prime Minister, 20 months ago.
When you say dodging partisan traps, are you talking about the fact that he seems to have brought BC's premier on side, or what do you mean?
It sounds like the pipeline will be going on the southern route,
Indeed.
avoiding the sort of oil tanker ban political trap. He seems to be managing the Alberta separatism and repairing the relationship, or taking really meaningful steps towards repairing that relationship, while still acknowledging that British Columbia has legitimate concerns, and focusing on the international trade component. We just saw the trade announcement, or the conference with the president of the Philippines, but the MOU with BC really does things to bring critical minerals and other Canadian products to market, the gateway to Asia. So he's playing 3D chess. He's doing all of it all at once, and he's doing it with a bit of a pragmatic view, or at least he seems to be, and I think that's reflected in the polls. I personally hope he continues to do well.
The question, of course, on all of this, and I would say certainly pipeline, but critical minerals too, right, is like the talk is moving in a positive direction, but the extent to which a government can deliver. Andrew, I want to turn to you because there is something really interesting that's happened with the BC NDP here. I mean, David Eby was like, this is a fictional pipeline, this is a wedge issue. He has been out there for months saying, pipeline bad, pipeline bad. He was not saying pipeline great today, but he has, I don't know if he's embraced it, he's accepted it. Tell me a little bit about what you make of the way that the BC NDP is handling this issue.
Well, I think for all three of the leaders, Smith, Eby, and Carney, they all recognize pretty early in that they have, we're playing from a position of weakness. All had to get something out of this deal. All of them needed to make sure that things were, the red lines weren't crossed, and that it looked like they were protecting their core values. I don't think Dave Eby has ever been necessarily opposed to a southern located pipeline. There was certainly opposition to the northern one. I think he's stood by that. He's obviously won concessions from the government on the tanker ban that the Prime Minister had already offered up months ago in legislation in terms of abandoning that. So getting that put back in, getting the southern route put back in, recognizing that he didn't really have a lot to work with to start with. And on top of it, with the MOU that has been released, significant new multi-billion-dollar investments into BC infrastructure. So this has been, again, as much as Stevie's talked about the Prime Minister being pragmatic, I think we've also seen both the provincial premiers in Alberta and British Columbia take a more pragmatic stance. And as a result, I think we're starting to see a federation that works. 3 months ago, it didn't look so good. Carney had offered up the tanker ban. The BC was looking like it was against investment. Alberta looked like it was, unable to manage the risk that had been brought in by the mismanagement of the separatist file. All of that's now starting to turn, and they are able to, I think, link arms and show that they're driving from their individual perspectives a deal that's going to be good for Canada.
Peter MacKay, I want to ask you where all of this leaves Pierre Poilievre, because this has already been a bit of an uncomfortable situation for him when UCP Premier Smith is saying this is great, and Mark Carney's been saying this is great, and Mr. Poilievre has had to say, well, let's see if this is really going to happen. Today we heard him say this is not the right route. It should be the northern route. That's more pragmatic. It would get our resources to market faster. When you have a Conservative Premier in favor of this, how much space is there left for Mr. Poilievre?
Well, the space will depend on the progress. I guess you mentioned earlier that this is still talk. And this route is viable. There's no question that going the northern route would have been preferable for Alberta, but here we are. If this actually achieves the result, and David Eby appears to be taking a knee as a result of big checks from Ottawa, I hearken back to a time when perhaps Quebec might have been bought in the same fashion with this type of investment. The question I think that the Conservatives will still push is, will this happen, and what will it cost? The billions that are being piled on billions, that is still problematic when one considers a recession, one considers running these massive deficits. That type of project, while welcome, the financing, the partnership, there's still a lot of elements to this, not necessarily in the hands of the government, but in terms of the private sector investment. But some of this does appear to be moving the underbrush out of the way and at least clearing the path for this to happen. It's still, of course, dependent on some of the other elements, including carbon capture, that Alberta is going to have to come up with. So I think it's fair to say, Catherine, there's still a lot of moving parts and a lot of elements of this that need to be held up to scrutiny.
Okay, Shachi, I'm going to let you choose your own adventure here because there's two things I'm curious about, and you can pick which one you want to weigh in on. I'd love to hear you just on public opinion and this moment. You can talk about what Mark Carney had to say yesterday or a couple of days ago about, our emissions are going to go up. But if you also just want to weigh in on who the biggest political winner is in all of this today, because, is Eby the master tactician here? Is it Mark Carney? Is it Danielle Smith? I'm interested in that too.
As long as the adventure I choose, remember sometimes you would flip a few pages and it would be like, you have died. So, as long as I live at the end of the adventure I choose. Look, I think if you let's see if we can tie this up in a nice bow and address everything.
For sure.
In terms of the biggest winner, first of all, Andrew mentioned that these were leaders who were being pragmatic. I actually think, especially the premiers themselves, but also the Prime Minister, all of these leaders needed a win, and that's what they were able to walk away with today. Mark Carney needed to be able to show that he could keep the West on side, particularly British Columbia and Alberta, who are often at cross purposes in terms of what they consider being heavy, swinging, influential provinces. They're often at cross purposes around what that means. But Danielle Smith has been under tremendous pressure from the separatist movement in her own province. She needed to be able to show something for this. I think we're going to see that this afternoon, later this afternoon. David Eby, behind in the polls, dealing with a province that is running record deficits, dealing with growth that slashed nearly 50% projected this year relative to last year. These are not good metrics for British Columbia. And as a result, even before we saw a BC Conservative leader elected last month now, we were already seeing the BC Conservatives leading the BC NDP by about 10 points politically. David Eby was able to come away from this by maintaining the red line, which was the tanker ban. British Columbians, a slight majority of them, have been warm to the notion of a pipeline, but they have not been prepared. The majority of them have not been prepared to walk through the door of saying, let's drop the northern tanker ban, because they understand just how perilous and precarious that northern passage is. And so when you think about all of those pieces put together, this was a win for Eby. I said on this panel, some months ago, there was an opportunity for him to tell the Prime Minister, let's make a deal. He may not like my characterization, but to put some sweet, sweet cake in the mouth of British Columbians, and I think the investment does speak to that proof point. That is a box ticked. And in terms of him now saying, well, look, the pipeline is something that I don't have constitutional jurisdiction over, that gives him an out. It remains to be seen whether he loses some of his pro-environmental or green flank, because the BC NDP have always been a coalition of, small p, big p, progressive voters, but also voters who have been very, very committed to the environmental side. They may float off to the Greens, but this opportunity also gives the BC NDP the opportunity to pick up some of those slightly center-right voters as well on the pipeline front.
Shachi, you covered more ground than the pipeline itself there. Hats off to you. That was amazing. I think you hit all the notes. Stevie, I am curious, though, about one of the points that Shachi raised there, which is this idea of more environmentally minded voters, both the voters and, of course, Liberal caucus, because there is this pipeline that seems to be moving forward. And we should make it clear to viewers, too. It's not like tonight something gets announced and it's all a go. There's still a duty to consult that has to happen over the course of the next few days. We're waiting to see, is this going to be a project of national significance? Does it get the sign off, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? But presuming things go ahead, within Liberal caucus, too, this question of how Mark Carney's saying, okay, our emissions are going to go up. I don't think he's been explicit about how many climate targets Canada is going to miss, but certainly we talked about it on the show the other day, 2030 targets out the window. how much further do things go? How does the Prime Minister try to navigate that? Or does he have to, really?
So I think we've seen since sort of day one of his being in office, he's taken a pragmatic approach on climate. I think he cares about climate change. I think he is a very well informed on the impacts and the necessities. He's an incredibly smart man, and he understands the numbers and the implications. But he was still willing to, remove the carbon tax sort of on day one. And I think what we're going to see here, as he weaves together this coalition of support and tries to maintain his lead in the polls, I think there's probably going to be something we're going to see on the other side for the environmental caucus, for more of the environmental wing of the party. I don't know what that is right now, but I do think it's going to be in something that is weighed out. We're going to have a fall budget. I would look to that to see something more for the environmental leaning groups, voters, and caucus members, because he's probably pushed them with the pipeline as far as they can go in one direction, and he'll look to even the ledger.
Peter MacKay, I wonder about your thoughts on Danielle Smith in all of this, how difficult it's been for her to get to this moment, and what happens to her politically after today's announcement. Is this going to be a giant political win across Alberta, and how we think about it in the context of the referendum?
I don't know if it's a giant political win, but it stems the bleeding, if I can put it that way, and the pressure that was previously mentioned. And like Mark Carney, who has sort of walked away from a lot of the Liberal initiatives and stakes in the ground on environment, and actually walked away from his own position on many of those things, Danielle Smith is getting flanked from both sides. You're seeing a lot of pressure from within her own caucus to stay the course and to continue to keep the focus on Alberta as far as projects, as far as investment, as far as, bringing their province forward after a decade or more of feeling that Ottawa was really, intruding not only on their jurisdiction, but on their prosperity and growth. The whole separatist movement, of course, is alive and well. How much this will impact on her political fortunes in the broader electorate is interesting. She's in some ways on safer ground when she's talking to, the electorate who are not the dyed-in-the-wool UCP supporters. It's the fight within for the soul of the Conservative Party, the United Conservative Party, so-called, in Alberta right now. That's her biggest challenge, and it was the challenge of her predecessor. And arguably two of her predecessors is keeping that coalition real, keeping it satisfied, keeping it fed with things like a pipeline announcement that may be hours away. Haven't heard yet about the proponents of this in terms of private sector investors. But Brian Jean is there, I think, ready to make a fairly substantial leap forward that will satisfy some, not all, of those who are avowed, separatists and want to see Alberta go it alone. That's good news for Canada if they were able to follow through with a project that is going to get Alberta crude to Tidewater and into the international market. And it's great news for Canada.